Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone, welcome to All Things Policy podcast. I am Avinash, a research analyst at the Takshashila Institution, and I have with me my colleague Ashwin Prasad, who is also a research analyst at the Takshashila Institution, and we both work at High Tech Geopolitics program. So this podcast is about the rockets and building in the context. So you might have heard that recently SpaceX has launched its fifth Starship, and I would like to know more about it, Ashwin. Directly over to you.
Hey Avinash, thanks for having me. Yes, the recent Starship test flight has been making a lot of buzz in the social media networks as well as the news circles. It is quite a momentous feat for the SpaceX company. So this was their fifth test flight, and the Starship is their most powerful rocket and arguably the most powerful rocket built by any company in the space technology sector around the world. So this rocket has been focused on the aspect of reusability from the beginning. So this has constantly been a major objective for them. And this time they achieved this milestone where they caught the half of the rocket, the first stage of the rocket, they caught that rocket back at the launch tower from where it was launched. The rocket basically has two stages, and the bottom stage, or the first stage, called the booster. The booster has, it has a lot of engines. It has over 30 engines, and these engines are expensive. And this part of the rocket generates the thrust that the entire Starship needs to escape the gravity pool of the Earth and reach, above the stratospheric levels, and eventually it just keeps climbing. But this part requires a lot of thrust, basically. And so this booster stage is an expensive part of the rocket. And until now, they had achieved a level of reusability in the previous test flights where the booster would burn out and it would have a controlled descent into the ocean, and then they would fetch it back. But as you can imagine, a dive into the ocean is not always the smoothest way to ensure reusability, because there might be some damage. It might need a lot of servicing, and it might not become reusable immediately, or at least in a short span of time. So their goal was to always achieve some reusability from Earth and on the land. And so this time they launched the Starship, and after around 7 minutes, the booster stage separated from the Starship, and it began its controlled descent towards Earth, and it was falling at easily over supersonic speeds. And as it neared the surface, some of the engines came back on, and it applied a brake of sorts and slowed down its speed. Eventually, it maneuvered itself back to the tower from which it launched. And and they call this tower the Mechazilla, and they call the parts that caught the rocket as chopsticks. And so the chopsticks caught the rocket from the exact same launch tower that it was launched, which is, it's quite the feat in terms of space technology.
Extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, even before we go, now you have explained what has happened, right? The reusability. I have a question in mind that why have we even went that path, right? Earlier, like 10 years or 12, 15 years back, the rocket is to go up, and, once it is done, it's all done. Those stages used to fall off, right? Now, why even people started looking that way? Why they want to have a reusable launch vehicle at all?
This is a very important question, and let me give you an analogy. Suppose every time you do your commute to the office, you take your car, and imagine that you had to use a new car every time you took it out of your garage, right? So It is a lot like that. Okay. And until now, a lot of the rockets that have been in use ever since the Cold War era all the way till the 21st century have been expendable. and the rockets would reach the specified orbit, or even further on to the all the way to the geostationary orbits, and then they would take their passengers or payloads to the destination, and most of the cases they would just burn up, they would fall back, or they would go into the grave. So they would not be in a state where they would be reused. But now, for the first time, reusability has come into focus because, as you can imagine, this is expensive, especially when you're building large rockets, and every time it gets burnt up, you have to build a new one. Every time you need to launch, you need to build a new one, and this can slow things down. For instance, India's PSLV cadence has been at least around, production rate has been like 2 a year, and
Okay.
this needs to increase if you're going to increase our activities in space. And the other big reason is cost. If you can build a launch vehicle which can go, come back, and be reused again, that's a huge cost saving potential right there. And for governments, that's a rocket that can be reused is a huge savings of the public funds. For companies like the one we're talking about, SpaceX, it's a huge commercial opportunity because they can launch more and they can charge for it, and they needn't spend resources and time and money building new ones. So it's exactly like a commercial airplane or a cargo plane, where they launch, they land, and then they do some maintenance, maybe some refueling, and they launch. That's their milestone. And with a rocket, since there are two stages, you can't have the whole rocket come back. In the case of Starship, so they have done this thing where they separate each half, and they are dealing with the reusability of each half separately. Right now, the booster has successfully been reused. The upper stage, the Starship itself, has also landed, but they landed in the ocean, and after successful landing, it did blow up. But that's something that I'm sure they're going to tackle in the coming test flights. But so reusability is going to be a very important consideration for all rockets going forward. And I would even argue that for any rocket in the coming years to be competitive, either commercially or as well as just being feasible option, it has to be reusable. Reusability is going to become a non-negotiable criteria for rockets. And there is efforts from all capable spacefaring nations to come up with some sort of a reusable technology in their own rocket arsenal.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And okay, so one more point which I got from your earlier, you were mentioning that Starship being a very powerful engine, right? It's something capable of carrying payloads, which this capability is something no one else has. So how do you think this opens up the future capability, or so what is your thought on that? I mean, where are we heading?
It is huge. Right now, the Starships, they claim to be able to carry 100 tons to the lower Earth orbit,
Okay.
which is by far the largest payload capacity that are among the functional rockets. I mean, the rockets, the SLS and all of those older rockets that launched, even the older rockets that launched the Apollo missions, the Saturn V, those were also very powerful.
Okay.
But this has reusability on top. And reusability with 100 tons is impressive. And they are going to expand this to 150 tons eventually, which is even more impressive. And this really matters because, whenever we are thinking about doing anything in space, there are two ways of doing it. One is you go there and you use the things around in space to do whatever you want to do.
Correct.
So that would be called in situ resource utilization.
Okay.
So you're using the resources in space to achieve whatever you want to achieve.
Okay.
That is the goal, right? But we're not there yet. To give an example would be to extract some sort of a fuel from space and use that to go farther or something like that. Or but that's the objective, and we haven't reached that objective in terms of capability and research yet. It's still in the initial infant stages. So right now, the best way to do things in space would be to carry everything from Earth. Whatever you need, you carry it from Earth.
Yeah.
And you go to space, and then you do whatever you want to do there.
Correct.
So to carry this is where the questions of powerful rockets come in, because powerful rockets can simply carry more. And in the initial years of space exploration, the biggest consideration for engineers and scientists and everyone was to think about the weight and the size of whatever they wanted to send.
Correct.
Be it a sensor, be it a human capsule that would house humans, whatever it was, that was the biggest consideration. And there was a lot of money, time, and effort spent into making things lighter or smaller, consideration of materials.
Correct.
All of that would be problems to solve or challenges to overcome when thinking about space travel. These powerful rockets, which have huge payload capacities with heavy lift capabilities, negate that requirements. Now you can just put big heavy things onto the rocket and it can carry them, and that makes it so while it increases the cost of building these rockets, it makes the cost of creating the payloads, whatever you do want to send, it simplifies that process a lot. It frees up a lot of resources and time, and that is going to remain the case. This need of taking a lot of things onto space is going to remain the major way of doing things until we make a lot of progress in in-situ resource utilization, which is not close. It's going to take time. And to look at it another way, even if you have small payloads, even if you don't need to carry heavy big things, you can still do that with these rockets and send a lot of them. So a good example would be to take what SpaceX does with its Falcon rockets also. They have something called the Starlink mega constellation of satellites, and these are small satellites in the lower Earth orbit. There is already over 7,000 of them, and they want to take it to like maybe over 40,000. And so they send a lot of satellites together. They bunch them up in the same rocket, they send them there, and then they are deployed. Now imagine what you can do with 100 or 150 ton payload capacity rocket like the Starship. You can send a lot more of those. So ride sharing missions where you share the rocket, a lot of payloads share the rocket in their ride to space, the numbers are going to increase. And that's just going to increase obviously the commercial value of whatever SpaceX hopes to achieve, but also the access to space in general. Right now, you have long waiting times to catch a rocket to space, simply because there is a lot of people who want to send things to orbit, but there are not enough rockets available. The demand is higher than the supply, and it's still a costly process. So there are a lot of people, I'm sure, who would want to send things, but they can't because it's just too expensive. Now, all of this is going to reduce those barriers for entry, time-wise and cost-wise. Now you're going to have more people. Good analogy would be, how much would it cost you to ship something to the other side of the globe? It would probably, the costs would be comparable, which is crazy, which is a crazy thing to imagine. So you can send your parcel on a rocket to space, and who knows what we're going to have 10 years from now. We're going to have space stations there. We're going to have small like micro habilitations there, and you can send your parcels there. So the access to space in general is a huge benefit of having these rockets that are reusable and can carry a lot of.
That's interesting. I mean, these two parameters, being able to carry a higher weight payload, right? And then doing a ride sharing for them will help. Not only that, adding on to the reusability is going to reduce the price as well as the time, when you can send your satellites. And so it's no longer be a premium stuff, right? I mean,
space is going to become very accessible. I was just reading that there was recently an ad which was shot in space. So we're going to do a lot of things that we traditionally did only on the surface. Now it's going to be done in space. These are the things. So this thing is the most upstream thing you can think of, right? So to do anything up there, you need to get up there. It's the rockets that get us there. So the real value from space comes from downstream things like putting a satellite up there and getting data out of it, and then using that data to do something useful back on Earth. So let's say a weather monitoring satellite can give us important information about cyclones that would come during the returning monsoon in Indian subcontinent, or a remote sensing satellite can help us map a city that we have and help us better plan it for better traffic management and urban planning and water and electricity distribution and all that. So this is the real value that we are going to get out of space in the near term. Right, all of those things about interplanetary exploration and lunar colonies they are still very, very cutting edge and very, very far away. The immediate benefit humanity has from space will come from applications like the examples I gave.
Correct.
So all of that are the real benefits from space, and they are going to be enabled by a cheap and affordable access to the orbits which the rockets give us.
Interesting. No, I'm just trying to think based on the example you gave, right? Recording an ad in space. I'm just trying to think, or maybe it would be, if you have any views on it. I mean, it is futuristic, right? I mean, it's the movie we have seen, where people have gone in space. So, what vision you think, or what do you think would be next 10 years looks like when, apart from what we have talked about in the example in terms of geospatial Earth monitoring and all, what else do you think can happen? And even in terms of geospatial, this interplanetary, right? What do you think? How this would pan out for us? How easy or accessible even that would become? 10 years or 15, 20 years down the lines. What is your view onto it?
Even talking specifically in terms of what the Starship can do. Right now, it is able to carry a lot of weight all the way to the orbit, and they're almost there. They're going to master reusability.
Correct.
In the iterative designs that they're going to have. The Artemis missions coming ahead. In one of the Artemis missions, I believe it's Artemis 4, NASA has contracted SpaceX to use a Starship as a lander on the moon.
Okay.
So there's going to be a Starship which will fly all the way to the moon, and it's going to carry the astronauts from the lunar orbit to the lunar surface and bring them back as well.
Okay.
So these are possibilities that the Starship is able to unlock because of its heavy launch capability as well as reusability. They are going to try and implement in-orbit refueling, where Starship the upper stage of the Starship, not the booster, will reach an orbit, and it will be able to refuel from another Starship.
Okay.
And then, therefore, it will have the capacity to go farther and longer. And this is important for missions like the lunar missions. It's important to reach Mars if you want to go all the way to Mars, and you want to, so let's say, carry humans to Mars. And you will then be able to, with this level of refueling and this capability, you will be able to, actually finally carry humans to Mars and do some exploration there. And so these are the possibilities we are expected to unlock. And just the ability of reaching farther and being able to do all of this is itself a huge boost in what we are seeing capable in space. And to just trust the humans to come up with interesting things to do there, right? Like every scientist or almost every practitioner of science that are performing something on the surface of the earth have some potential to do all of that from space. So pharmaceutical manufacturing is happening in space because non-gravity atmosphere offers some advantages to certain processes. So there is a lot of potential, and it's just up to the people to come up with applications for it, and I'm sure they will.
Yeah, right.
And even without that, the value we get out of satellite data is, I don't think we can easily wrap our heads around that. It is so full of potential. All of this is definitely going to depend on our rocket technologies and how cheap, affordable, accessible they make the space domain for us. And with as more, India is also developing a reusable launch vehicle, and so is China. And so there are many agencies and corporations and entities trying to master the reusability angle of it all. And when we do, we'll just see a lot more launches, and the launch cadence will greatly increase. And that is something that is interesting times ahead.
That's nice. It reminds me of Star Trek. how easy it would be to go to space. Just like you have to go to space airport. Now you can go to spaceport. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
if
Imagination.
yes, I mean the way we are heading, the way things are getting, the technology is heading right, and where the accessibility is getting better. I can only imagine where we will end up in the near future.
But
Right?
Avinash, before we wrap up, I also want to highlight some of the limitations that come with reusability and heavy launch capability.
Okay.
Because while we have talked about all the possibilities and advantages it unlocks, it is also worth talking about the cost with which it comes. So
Okay.
one thing is, every time a rocket is designed to be reusable, it has to save some of its fuel to make its return journey back to the surface.
Correct.
Which means that the rocket would have otherwise been able to carry even heavier things were it not reusable. So reusability does come at the cost of some payload capacity. It is worth noting that. But on the whole, reusability is a good thing because we are generating less space debris, less waste, and it is like, I'm sure all the processes that are required to manufacture rockets come with their own carbon emissions.
Correct.
So all of that is avoided, and all of those advantages are there. But still, the payload capacity does decrease. And on the flip side, speaking of carbon emissions, as we right now, the percentage of let's say carbon emitted from rockets is probably less than 1% of the global CO2 emissions. I'm just guessing that number, but it's still a very, very small percentage. So, but with reusability and with launching rockets as big as these, we will see that there's a launch emissions from these rockets are going to increase a lot.
Correct.
I was reading that just the Starship, at its highest throttle, when it was being launched, it was consuming 20 tons of methane and liquid oxygen, which is per second. So this is, we can't imagine the kind of emissions that one singular event will cause. And imagine, we have statements like there will be a Starship launched every day from 2030. And even if that doesn't happen in 2030, maybe it'll happen at some point, maybe by 2035. And when we reach that point, imagine the emissions that we're going to have. And we are already battling climate change.
Correct.
And so these are important points to remember and ponder about. And hopefully we will see technologies that reduce these emissions to an extent. But those are, like any technology, those are problems and challenges we need to overcome. But yeah,
let's hope our engineers are working towards it, and we would be able to find solution to these as well. Yeah, great. Oh, thank you, Ashwin. Thanks a lot for joining me and telling more about the rockets and the future of it. And thank you for our audience to listen to our podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Avinash. This was a wonderful chat.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.